while he said his priority will be education and health and the economy, these should have been the priorities of the SNP and government for the last 17 years. So why do we have issues with them? So while it sounded good, there were no solutions. I haven't heard anything yet about what he's going to do to correct these areas. And the other point, I thought you were right to highlight it. Party unity really came to the fore in that speech there from John Swinney, but no reason or rationale from John Swinney about what's happened to the party's unity, why it's been disunited recently.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was John Swinney giving his press conference at the Advanced Research Institute of Glasgow, Advanced Research Centre of the University of Glasgow. He spoke for about 15 minutes. And I would say if I was a member of the SNP, I'd be pretty pleased with that speech. I thought it was a good speech. Let me unpack it for you and give you what I thought were the political messages. First of all, he paid tribute, obviously, to his predecessor, Hamza Yousaf. That might be seen as good manners, but it's also led him to obviously talk about party unity. He talked about his own... the themes were party unity, which he stressed at the beginning and said, used the fact that he was appointed rather than elected to the post as an example of the party coming together. And at the end of the speech, of course, mentioned Kate Forbes, his would-be challenger, and again put that up as a picture of unity. So one theme was unity. The second theme was modernity, where he took the fact that he was speaking at the Advanced Research Centre of the University of Glasgow to talk about Scotland's future. And he mentioned a lot of domestic policies. He mentioned what he calls the SNP successes, like child payment, university tuition, childcare, but also the economy, jobs, cost of living, transport and climate. The third theme was cross-party working, where he said that he's clearly got a minority government at the moment. He will work with parties. He stressed his experience. And I thought as well, while he mentioned independence, he sent a clear signal that independence was now going to take second place to governing for Scotland. I detected one note where he could be said to be taking a swipe at Labour, where he talked about Hamza Yousaf's stance on Gaza. It's quite clear that the Labour Party has suffered from some of its voters deserting the Labour Party over their stance on Israel-Gaza, and I thought John Swinney made a subtle reference to that in his opening remarks. But those are my takes. But somebody who actually knows what he's talking about, of course, is John Boothman, the Scottish political correspondent for The Times. John, what did you think of the speech?
I thought it was a very reasonable speech. It's very John Swinney in this new leadership role. I think really signalling a dash for the centre ground. I think it's something that will not please a lot of people on that progressive wing of the SNP and the Greens, that he's focusing on bread and butter issues. The SNP has been hugely criticised for being focused and fixated almost on identity issues. I think there was a big emphasis there on talking and not shouting. John's got a bit of a reputation as a ranter and a fixer, but he'll need to employ those skills as a fixer, because the other thing he's signalling is an issue-by-issue approach in the Scottish Parliament, that he's prepared to work with anybody in order to advance his government's priorities. I think the Gaza statement was really more a tribute to Hamza than anything else. Hamza has really joined himself to that campaign, partly because his wife is from Gaza, his parents-in-law were stranded there, and the SNP think that they made some political capital on that issue over the course of the past few months, but nothing there particularly surprising me. The mention of Kate Forbes, again, I'm interested in, because John Swinney wants to have a big tent in the SNP, bring everybody in, unify everybody. And the fact that he's managed to get to today without a contest either from Kate Forbes or Graham McCormick is, for me, really interesting also. But that focus on the economy and health and away from some of the other big and divisive issues that have caused problems for the SNP, something interesting for me. On independence, of course, it's front and centre to the SNP as a party and as a government. John Swinney contradicted Hamza Yousaf the other day. Hamza Yousaf, in his closing speech, said that independence was frustratingly close. And John Swinney said the other day, No, it isn't. So the SNP are going to obviously put that front and centre at the general election, but at the same time knowing it's way down people's priorities.
Well, John, thanks so much for coming on the programme and talking about that. Hopefully you'll stay with us, because I'd like to come back to you on occasion to talk about some of the other issues that I think might come up when reality hits the SNP. But we're going to go in a moment to speak to Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives. But this is Ed Vaizey on Times Radio.
Download the free Times Radio app and listen to us wherever you are.
This is Times Radio.
Welcome back to the show. It's Ed Vaizey on Times Radio. I've extended my show by half an hour to cover John Swinney's first speech as the new leader of the SNP. He'll be appointed First Minister tomorrow. We're lucky enough to be joined now by Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, as well as the MP for Moray and an MSP. Welcome to the show, Douglas.
Good afternoon, Ed.
Well, look, I want your political analysis because you were the one who came on the programme when Humza Yousaf resigned and said John Swinney will be crowned. There won't be a leadership election. So you've got it down pat. Tell us what's going to happen with the SNP from your perspective.
Well, I agree with a lot of the analysis from yourself and John Boothman. That was, a very articulate speech. John is a very, experienced debater, and he will need to come across with that openness of being willing to listen and work with others. But while he said his priority will be education and health and the economy, these should have been the priorities of the SNP and government for the last 17 years. So why do we have issues with them? So while it sounded good, there were no solutions. I haven't heard anything yet about what he's going to do to correct these areas. And the other point, I thought you were right to highlight it. Party unity really came to the fore in that speech there from John Swinney, but no reason or rationale from John Swinney about what's happened to the party's unity, why it's been disunited recently. And again, John Swinney served in government for 16 of the last 17 years and has been a very senior backbencher for the last 12 months. So where have those problems come from? Again, these are issues that I think will be teased out in the coming days and weeks. It's certainly something that some of the journalists in Scotland are looking at.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we both come from particular political perspectives, so you can't necessarily pretend that this is pure political analysis. But one thing that I wanted to ask John Boothman, which occurred to me, is obviously when you give your first speech as a leader, that's your moment, that's your party conference moment, as it were. But reality will hit, won't it, when he does his first reshuffle, for example? How important would an SNP, who he puts in what position, be in terms of that issue of SNP unity?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be crucial, but also we've seen statements this morning from Patrick Harvie, the co-leader of the Scottish Greens, highlighting how closely he's worked with John Swinney in the past and looks forward to working with an SNP government going forward. So while I don't expect any Green ministers, they will be looking very closely about who is appointed to which briefs and what their priorities will be. So John Swinney does have a very challenging job ahead of him now, keeping the SNP and the Greens on side, two nationalist parties that want independence, while focusing on these key public services that have suffered over the last 17 years they've been in power.
Brilliant. Well, Douglas Ross, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. That's Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives and the MP for Moray.
I believe in cabinet government. Ministers who are absorbed in their individual responsibilities, but making the links across responsibilities to tackle our biggest challenges. And ministers contributing to the common good by their participation in open, substantive cabinet discussion. That is how good government comes about. The SNP government does not have a parliamentary majority. That means we must work to seek common ground in the Scottish Parliament in the interest of the public and of good governance. That means our approach in Parliament will have to change, to listen, to compromise, to work with all other political parties. It might be a statement of the obvious, but I can defend myself robustly in Parliament. And once or twice over the years, I've had to do so.